won't you come along on the river ride with me? I'm Connor, and the rest of the 706 podcast crew. Introduce yourselves, guys.
Anthony.
Kirk.
Tony.
So this is a podcast where we take a look at a movie. One of us brings it in, and we all have to decide, well, rather these guys have to decide by committee whether it's one of the 706 great movies of all time. Now, so far we've had 2 episodes. Neither has gotten in. So, it was my turn to pick today, and Little Big Man, 1970, Arthur Penn, starring Dustin Hoffman. Really interesting movie. It sort of is a sweeping epic of sorts. It's a revisionist western where we follow this narrator, Jack Crabb, as he looks back on his life. He's in the present day, 1970. He's looking back on his whole life and how all of his adventures in the Old West. And, it begins with him. He's a 10-year-old boy. He's ambushed while his family is crossing Great Plains. His parents are killed, and he's taken in by the Cheyenne Indians, who then raise him from that point on. And then things go on from there. He's, leaves the Cheyenne and is taken in by whites. He joins the cavalry. He finds a homestead. He marries. He does all these things. He goes back and forth. It's really it's a crazy tale of a guy who is really encountering all sorts of things. Everything you can imagine. A snake oil salesman. All these sorts of things. Let's just get some impressions. We just watched the movie. I have, of course, seen it before. Most of you guys, it's your first time seeing it. Or all of you, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen it before, Tony?
I have not.
I haven't seen it either, so yeah.
It's blank slate, yeah.
Yeah, it's a blank slate. So we just watched it just minutes ago. So let's get some first impressions. Tony, please begin.
Oh, please begin. Oh, man. No, I did like this movie. It's interesting. It felt kind of like, I think Connor has talked about this movie for a long time now. I always knew it was one of his favorites, and I heard him talk about it with other people, and I think I heard you make like a Forrest Gump comparison at one point, and that's all I can think about is like, this is like an older Forrest Gump.
It is an older
Forrest
Gump.
That's not awful. Like, it's like, because he's just going through life, floating through life accidental-like. And he's like talking to this guy in the present day, and he's reflecting on his life as a very old man. And, he just kind of goes from group to group, from situation to situation. And he has all these kind of wild misadventures. It's not quite as like, although it is very just kind of like circumstances beyond his control sort of just compel him forward into these different environments. Which isn't to say he doesn't have any agency, because towards the end especially, he does sort of make things happen, or he sets out to accomplish a goal. He does kind of scheme, he sort of plots as we get to the end of the movie. But yeah, he goes through a lot. He goes through the, heartbreak and triumph, and this movie has a lot of comedy. There's a lot of funny moments. It's got a very colorful cast of characters. The cast in general is very good. We have Faye Dunaway in it. We have the Oscar-nominated Chief Dan George, who's awesome. He's hilarious. And who's the actor who plays General Custer? Let me look that up real quick. But the guy who plays General Custer... I know, I'm my guy, yeah! General Custer is great. I like General Custer in this movie. He's very funny. He's very, full of himself and silly. But the movie does have moments of darkness, of course, and heartbreak, as I said. But it really just kind of delivered all the goods. And it's a longer movie, but it didn't feel too long. It felt like the right length. So
there's a lot there, yeah.
Yeah.
General Custer, I saw him driving an Uber on 7th Ave the other day. So that's how important he is. No, I would like to hear Anthony's opinion.
First.
Yes. Beauty before age. Let's go.
Oh, okay. Well, before I give my quick opinion, or first I'll say, I generally, I think, really like this movie. I thought it was great. I will say, though, I have 2 confessions to make. The first confession is that in my overall film education I've tried to create for myself, the Western is something I'm just completely lacking. And of course, Same. I've seen the major ones I think most people would have seen at this point: The Searchers, High Noon, Darling Clementine, Stagecoach, and a few others. But it's just something I'm just not quite aware of. So I just want to let the viewers know I know they're used to me as this knowledgeable guy. But second, I am familiar with actually the book this movie's based on. I read it in middle school. It's a Thomas Berger novel.
Really?
That it's a very good book. Ralph Ellison and Henry Miller actually championed it as a contender for the Great American Novel. The book differs, I think, in a lot of places, though, so I don't want people to worry that I'm bringing in the book reading into this. But yeah, no, I really like this movie. I think I disagree. I actually don't really care for Custer's character. I think it's one of the weaker parts of the movie, but I think this movie's ripe for various interpretations. There's a lot to it. It does feel long, and at times it did kind of seem a little slow, but I think that's just part of this genre of the pick or risk it's adopting for the film. And but yeah, I really liked it.
All right, fair enough. I will put my 2 cents in, my cursory analysis of it. I did enjoy it as well. I hope to not. I think we'll still be able to formulate some arguments, but I did enjoy it. It bridged that gap so perfectly between objective ethnography and subjective sort of travel writing, or just very much like a superfluous narrative with characters that are sometimes larger than life, and events and circumstances that follow suit. So I did appreciate how the movie could accomplish both of those things simultaneously for me. I thought Dustin Hoffman was okay. He didn't necessarily blow me away. He felt like he felt very flexible in this movie, but he didn't necessarily draw me to his character. Another thing, very stickler thing, but his accents kept oscillating between like Brooklyn and Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and that's it's like a Hoffman thing. He doesn't necessarily command the best accents sometimes, but that's just a minor gripe in the overall scheme. So, yeah, I mean, are you surprised to hear that we all liked it, or did you expect?
I thought the biggest sort of sticky point was the length and the sort of the scope of it. I think we've hit on all the big points. It's a huge movie. There are things that, of course, recur in the plot, things that come back, things that are revisited, but you can really tell that it's based on a book because you're going scene to scene to scene to scene. It's very brisk, and there's a whole lot that's cut out from the Thomas Berger novel. Interesting things, but a lot of the dialogue is taken from the novel. But it is just very interesting to think about because it is a Western, and it's sort of like very representative of this whole idea of the revisionist Western around, say, 68, 69, 70. These are the time that revisionist Westerns. A big one is the Wild Bunch. And the kind of one of the things that the revisionist Western sort of does is that it shows the West as being very dirty, very sort of nasty. A lot of just sort of tries to demythologize the West in a way that it had been so deeply mythologized in American cinema up to that point. And essentially, this idea of like the Wild Bunch, very violent, very bloody. We're seeing sex like for the first time in movies. And Little Big Man is like that. It's one of those kinds of movies, but it's very different because of the sort of the scope of it. And we've had the word picaresque. We've had the words Forrest Gump. And they're sort of the same genre. It's the story of this little man. He's an everyman who has to journey sort of across his time and come into contact with all these different philosophies and these kinds of things. And that is almost exactly what Forrest Gump does. However, It's interesting that in some ways, what I find so cool about this movie is even though it tells you about the West, it actually tells you a lot, too, about its own time, about kind of the Vietnam War era, the very sort of era that Forrest Gump tries to sort of chronicle in its own plot. However, this is, of course, a movie about the Old West. So it's really interesting. It's a really interesting movie for that reason, and we can talk about. I'll prompt you guys on what do you think about the historical. How is this different from other westerns? I mean, if you haven't seen so many westerns, maybe you can't answer that. But You know, and also, I mean, it just appeals to me on a fundamental level. I think it's a good story.
Well, right. This is 1970. This is right in the smack middle of the era of Hollywood's anti-war films or anti-establishment films. I mean, this is just shortly after Cool Hand Luke is the famous example I think of, and also this is 3 years after Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah.
You know, the time when characters are becoming a little more sketchy. But what I find interesting is I don't feel like Dustin Hoffman's character is really doing that. I mean, I think this is a good anti-establishment movie, but Dustin Hoffman doesn't quite take on this cool anti-hero look here.
No,
he's different. I kind of disagree with Kirk here. I really like Dustin Hoffman in this movie. I don't think it's this greatest range of acting he's displaying here, but I think he, at this point, has his persona already established from The Graduate. He's kind of this nerdy, awkward guy who's, like you were saying, everyman. Yeah, he's the perfect bumbler for this type of setting. He's able to easily go on adventure to adventure, and as an audience member, I was able to buy that this is a type of guy who just goes with the wind. He's falling into whatever situation, just trying to just work through it and move on. And I really like that. Weird trivia moment here, actually, is supposedly when he was getting ready to play the old man and doing the narration, he actually would stay in his trailer dressing room and just shout at the top of his voice for an hour straight until he got that voice down. I thought it was great. For the old
that's
man,
a great piece of acting. The old man.
It's very method. I
The
love
old
it.
man. The thing about the old man that throws me a little bit is he's supposed to be very, very old. He's supposed to be like 120 years old or whatever because he has to be in the present day and to have lived through all this stuff. So they give him like this old age makeup, which is like it's kind of simultaneously very good and really bad. Like it doesn't look convincing at all, but it's sort of like it's impressively done, and it is sort of distancing. It does kind of distance you from the movie, but it's very unobtrusive because you're mainly just hearing that character's voiceover. We only see him at the very beginning and the very end. And when we see him at the end again, it's like they have to bookend the movie with it, but it doesn't really have much of a emotional impact for me. You know, they're just kind of closing. The story has ended. You know, we're ready to be done. They got to show him, say goodbye to the historian or the guy who's interviewing him. But I do like the voice, at least. The voiceover, I think, is very good. It definitely is like this guy has been through a lot. He has yelled a lot, at least for an hour.
I just want to say, in terms of the bookend scenes, the beginning and the ending with the old man, that once again Tony's just wrong. Those scenes are just completely important to the overall movie. I'm going to give that interpretation later. I want to get back to Kirk here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I am speaking from a place of relative ignorance compared to these cinephiles, so maybe some people in the audience will relate to me. I have not exhausted the Western category, I must say. So, but
you are the fan.
I've seen every single Western ever made.
At the risk of sounding like a complete layman, I will say
I've seen more than even he's seen.
that this did provide ample. I would say it spanned context, it spanned emotions, it provided you with kind of this wide array of like a smorgasbord from which to take what you might like or what you might relate to. I did appreciate how there were some very touching interpersonal moments, and at the same time there were those classic archetypal gunslinging moments,
yes.
And then also, you know, for history buffs, you could really put the movie in its place temporally back in the 19th century, excuse me. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I have visited the Battle of Little Bighorn in Montana.
Oh, really?
Custer's Last Stand.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was.
You were the sole white supremacist.
Yes, I was. Barely, though.
Was this true to life? Is this how it happened?
No, I don't remember it. I didn't see any vending machines in the movie or any like bathrooms or ugly, awkward tour guides. But
did we watch the same movie? Or
I don't think so. Honestly, it didn't look like this. But yeah, I was very food poisoned. I had gotten sick in Idaho on my way back to Wisconsin, so I was half conscious, but I can appreciate the fact that they did. Oh, they even brought in Wild Bill Hickok as a side character.
Oh yeah, he was great too.
Yeah.
Another one of those great little colorful
roles,
characters.
yeah.
Yes, it was very much like Forrest Gump, meeting Elvis, and
All
it
the
very much
characters,
felt like
yeah.
that. So I did connect it to Forrest Gump as well, but I didn't mind it. It wasn't out of place, and it didn't feel like a blatant grab. Yeah.
No,
It
what I
felt
liked
good,
about I don't want to go too long with Forrest Gump. With Forrest Gump, it's going for like the blatant like nostalgia factor of the baby boomers or the older people seeing the movie. With this, obviously, there's no real nostalgia unless you're 120 years old, like Dustin Hoffman. But
They're just all these legends that
the
belong
legendary
to
figures.
America. Yeah.
And what I like about that is that like what the movie does is sort of it has like everyone kind of comes back in the end, and we see how like bad things have happened, or like we said, kind of demythologizes the West. Like we have kind of the Faye Dunaway character, who is like the wife of this. Is he a
He's a preacher. Yeah.
He's a preacher. Okay,
Yeah.
she's the preacher's wife, and there's a sexual tension between her and Dustin Hoffman. He comes and sees her later in life, and she's become a prostitute, and she's a widow, and everything's just going horrible for her. And then Wild Bill Hickok, he comes back, and he's old, and he ends up getting killed, and then he comes into the snake oil salesman he used to kind of like, the lovable snake oil salesman he used to kind of pal around with for a while. And he's even in graver health. He's lost an arm, he's lost a leg. So it shows how kind of over time, like, he sees like all these people, like, they're not really living good lives. Like, bad things are continuing to happen to them. So the movie is kind of a symmetry that way. He has when he's younger and he meets all these people, and then when he's older and after his wife and son has died, and it's kind of the dark half of the movie. And he even contemplates suicide at one point, which of course is not what happens, but so I thought that was kind of an interesting structural thing. And I'm sure it's the same in the novel, the same encounters.
Mm-hmm.
Right, similar, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and it's an interesting because as you pointed that the moment, the Battle of the Washita River, where Custer and the cavalry go back on their promise. They've given all this land to the Cheyenne and other Indians on this reservation, and then they cross and they basically slaughter everyone there. This, I think, is kind of this is kind of the center moment of the movie. It's kind of it's the sort of the nadir. It's where everything kind of goes to shit. We've just had a very absurd scene before it. It's very happy. It's about fertility, about domestic bliss, this kind of thing, and then immediately we have the cavalry comes. And it's just quite a slaughter, and it actually borrows a lot from actually Vietnam era imagery. Mm-hmm. It's a very freaky and kind of uncanny thing to actually see. And it really, whenever I watch it, it puts a damper on me in such a powerful way. I mean, this is nothing to laugh at anymore, And it still has humor after that, but it's amazing how much the tone can shift in this movie.
Yeah, Arthur Penn, I think, was just like a genius with this. I mean, you see it in Bonnie and Clyde too. Here's a little bit more restrained.
Yeah.
But I think he's one of the top directors that could just come to my mind who really know how to control violence and how to segment that away from these kind of more comedic or more dramatic scenes, and just how to use violence. It's just such a powerful effect. I mean, at this time they didn't have these grand special effects to kind of stage these scenes, and so it just feels so much more visceral, I think. And the lack of or when you do see the blood, it doesn't look like modern movie blood. It almost feels more real to me, even though it looks more colorful. It stands out. It looks almost similar to, I think, the Indian paint that they're putting on their face.
This was actually, I just saw Spartacus, and the blood had a very similar look. It's this kind of unnaturally bright,
red,
almost like orange looking paint, shiny blood.
And I think that just adds an extra punch, though, to these scenes. We know this isn't real, but just the way it's kind of combined with these practical effects just brings it to a new level.
No, there's some amazing sequences just in terms of visceral filmmaking. There's a scene where it's kind of earlier in the movie. It's very fun. It's a funner battle scene than what we get later, of course. But there's the carriage. They're basically they're in a carriage, and they're being chased, and there's a horse chase, and Dustin Hoffman climbs onto a horse, and he jumps from horse to horse, and this other guy, this Indian, comes on, and he doesn't realize, he recognizes Dustin Hoffman, oh my god, this guy can do what I can do. This is crazy. I've never seen a white man who can do this. And they kind of both hop from horse to horse. I'm not selling it very well, but when you see it, it's like really incredible.
It's pretty cool, yeah.
It's obviously there's a stuntman in there at some point.
And the soundtrack going, the sort of harmonica, sort of blues band that was sort of very popular around this time.
What's beautiful about that scene too, though, is like even as Dustin Hoffman and this Indian are jumping from horse to horse, there's action going on in the background. I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's like these like two people like fighting over a shotgun, and it's just so unclear like who's winning and who's like losing this conflict, and it's just like great. I mean, there's like so much more going on in the background. I love it. Yeah.
The guy gets killed. What is the priest gets shot with an arrow, right?
Yeah.
And he slumps over dead, and it's very funny. So just again to show you the tonal shifts, like it never feels kind of weird or unnatural or like very like deliberate. Like, okay, here's the really the funny part, or here's the sad part. It all kind of blends together very well in a way that I think is kind of commendable or shows certain craftsmanship.
To put a damper on it, I'm curious if anyone else here might have sensed some. It did feel a little bit like colonial cinema in a sense. Like there was a sense of like a lot of the customs and practices of the American Indians were in fact like the butt of jokes and kind of caricaturized to a sense, and they were dehumanized a little bit. Like they're viewed as there are certain elements that are very nuanced within the movie that I can't necessarily explain in the abstract, but for me, I just felt like the movie presumes that the audience is white. The audience is, for me, the audience is a white of European ancestry,
right.
American, and I just I don't know if maybe that dyad is a little skewed. I don't know. It's just, I mean, it's of its time, like Connor. It is. You can tell it. I don't know if it would have floated in our present day and age, but I would like to hear what you guys think.
Sure. I mean, it really begs the question because it is a revisionist Western. The movie thinks that it's portraying the West as it kind of really was, portraying it again. I think it does try to demystify cowboys and Indians. Indians in this movie, the portrayal is complicated. I think we can't say that it's totally PC. There's still some things that are kind of offensive, kind of weird. Yeah. We can't just say that they're all just sort of traditional to cinema because they made a choice of having them. But there is something to this movie about the way Native Americans are portrayed. First of all, I think the movie really believes that it is Native Americans and the Cheyenne. The Cheyenne are pointedly, they call themselves the human beings. And there's this constant sort of dichotomy between human beings versus white men, and it is this question of worldviews. There's a great speech that Old Lodgeskins, is played by Chief Dan George, gives sort of in the middle of the movie that I think is kind of the defining sort of speech of the movie, that it's the difference between human beings, that is the Cheyenne, and the whites, is that the Cheyenne believe that everything is alive. Animals, people, trees, rocks, etc., water, they believe everything is alive, while white men believe that everything is already dead, and if things keep trying to live, white men will rub them out. And this is a super pointed sort of thing about white or say European or Western culture, materialism, utilitarianism, nihilism, these kinds of things, and sort of wanting to. It's this worldview that is unsustainable, and it is so. It's kind of bleeding us all dry. Even whites themselves, it's bleeding them dry. It's killing them. And I think that's kind of one of the primary messages of the movie. So it is a movie that's sort of, it's noble savage with a twist. It's this kind of thing of, it's not only noble, they're noble savages because they're simple or they're, but even more than that, they just have not such a megalomaniacal way of looking at things. But I mean, I like to turn the conversation to you guys. I mean, like I said, I think there's some, like ethnographically, it's a bit more accurate than some other movies. It takes the job a bit more seriously. It doesn't try to say that these are Indians in general. It speaks of just the Cheyenne. But what do you guys think in terms of portrayal?
I think the most interesting thing you said there, Kirk, is that you said it was almost dehumanizing how these Indians are portrayed. Because I love that in the middle of the film, the chief tells Little Big Man, that's Dustin Hoffman's character, human beings are death. And then Connor brought up this fact that, these Indians are calling themselves human beings and calling the white men as if there's a difference. And I think what the overall movie's trying to show is like, well, if this is the case, why do you want to be a human being here? I mean, it's interesting. No, it's interesting because if human beings are death and all of this life is going to end that way, I think the Indians are able to kind of stand away from that, and that's what makes it noble for them. You know, they have created this persona to differentiate themselves with, and yet from the audience perspective, it's like, well, this is kind of a poor, you know, almost like tragic fate that they've dealt themselves. I mean, I love that. I mean, it is a bit noble savage. I will say that. There's faults in that.
It's a white Western use
Right.
of Native Americans,
but the
as
white
a message. Right?
the white man does come off, I think, really bad here. Awful.
Sure.
Yeah.
No,
Sure,
ridiculous.
yeah. But I don't know, and I guess I'm gonna sound like I'm being repetitive or I'm falling into some sort of pattern, but I some of the comedy felt misplaced, and I said this in our last podcast, but it's like, if they're striving for these deep empathic messages that can transcend cultures, why do we need the comic relief of Dustin Hoffman, you know, falling into a ditch or whatever?
I don't like this idea that comedy and truth, or comedy and like humanity, are these like antithetical things, that if you're doing comedy it distracts from that. I disagree so profoundly with that. I think comedy is kind of a vehicle for that a lot of times. The comedy is the way we explore these issues. Not that that's what this movie is doing necessarily. But I think the comedy just makes it a more entertaining movie. It makes it a warmer, more inviting movie to contrast with like the darkness of some of its moments. And I don't think that means, you know, that's any kind of flaw at all. And I love the comedy. The ending actually works beautifully this way, because it actually, I think, proves my point. Because the ending is after Custer's last stand, so, you know, the Cheyenne have triumphed for the moment, and Dustin Hoffman is speaking with, you know, his father figure, or he calls him grandfather, this Chief Dan Dorge's character, and Chief Dan Dorge says, you know, there are unlimited amount of white men, and there are a limited amount of human beings, and so basically he's saying we're doomed. Like, we've won today, but I know we're doomed. But my point back to the comedy. My point about the comedy is basically this goes into a comedic moment as he and Dustin Hoffman are walking down a road, and he has this tangent about his wife that's very silly and very absurd. It's one of the funnier things in the movie, and it's just a sense of warmth. It's like, we have to go on. We know we're doomed, but we have to just go on. We can still joke. We can still have fun. Life has to continue.
Yeah, that's fair. But let's look at the scene before that, the climactic scene, the scene where Custer is being overwhelmed by the Native Americans, by the American Indians. He's acting like a complete fool. It's like Monty Python, and I guess, is that for us to dig into like his psychopathology? Like, I don't understand really
I do.
why
I place it in its time. I think there's maybe scenes that were cut out don't quite show this. Yes, it is almost Python-esque. This is like, you know, the sort of this era of real suspicion of politicians, hatred of politicians. They are megalomaniacal. They sort of have no attachment. You know, they try to act all noble. They have these messages, but they're insane inside. And that sort of, I think, is contrasted with, you know, with old Lodgeskins, who tries to do this thing where he tries to die on purpose and he can't do it, and he just kind of throws his hands up and says, well, you know, sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't. You end and you kind of, life goes on with a joke. And this is very important too, because it's actually one of the few things that has changed from the book. In the book, Jack Crabbe says that Lodgkins died right there, but the movie makes a point of saying it doesn't work. And I think that's a very interesting thing. And so let's have a closing remark from Anthony. We've got to move on.
Yeah, no, I want to give my final interpretation. I'm going to try to sum up all of your guys' points, though. I think it works the way I've viewed the film, ignoring the book. But this film, I think, in terms of the comedy, I think in the movie, the tragedy is often covered up by a joke. And these kind of bittersweet things that are going on is often presented comedic. But what I think the movie is trying to show us is that life itself, just as the Chief is saying human beings are destructive, life just destroys. It ends in death regardless of what happens, and it is ultimately this kind of downward trajectory we're on. And it is our job to try to figure out what's going on and what we should do. What's interesting, I think, is these things that people tend to turn to find like solace for the situation, whether it be religion, war, or violence, alcohol. They all tend to end up just ruining these characters' lives. And even these other things that are more warm, or that we would think of as more warm, the family, love, ultimately those go away too. It's a pretty like sad thing to think about. But there's one, I think, solution that the movie's offering to us, and that's why I think the beginning and ending scenes are just really important with the old little big man, the Dustin Hoffman character. What is he doing? He's telling a story. It's the only way for this character or any character to really survive, however personalized, however different it is from real history. That's the only way to move on and to live past your own existence. And so, I mean, the beginning and end, what is he doing? He's telling a story. It's the notion that life destroys, I think, and a story is a way to preserve what we have going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well,
I loved it. Yeah,
that's a good.
However embellished that story may be, which is another discussion, is like,
I mean,
is it meant to be taken
unreliable narrative?
That's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
exactly.
However embellished or personalized, it is the way we continue our
tell the
existence.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's close up here. Let's get the votes. Does this movie belong among the 706 great movies?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say sure. Yeah, I think if there are 706 spots, I think this is comfortably. I'm going to say this is number 562.
Okay, number 562. I'm not sure it's a ranking like
way
that.
too
But
high. At least 540. Come on.
I mean, too low.
Whatever. It's too high, as in too high, but too low.
Yeah.
Too high a number. But yeah, I do believe this is one. This deserves to be in. This deserves to be in lights. 706. Little Big Man. Yes, I do.
Well, I mean, regardless of how I vote,
Yes, it's over.
this is in. But I am also an astounding yes, and we have our first film.
First film,
and it's unanimous.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Oh my God.
Well, Connor
That's
actually
amazing.
voted no.
What do we do? Is they're supposed to like?
I never wanted this to happen. I hate this movie.
I picked it ironically.
Yeah.
Wait, is there a celebratory sound effect? I think we'll play that now. The celebratory sound
Here
effect.
it goes.
All right.
Wow,
Good.
that was
That's
something.
good.
God.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So we have that. Number 706, 705 to go. Now, okay. So for our next episode, we need another movie. You guys have your picks. Please present them, and I will be the judge.
My pick. My pick is the 2013 film. I know you want to mix up the years, but we have not done a film from the current decade. That's why I'm arguing. We've done 90s. We have done aughts, and we've done, depending on how you count it, the 60s or 70s, 1970, whatever. We haven't done the teens. We haven't done the present decade. 2013's Harmony Korine Spring Breakers. This is a wacky and wild film. Oh, the reaction on the table. Our prize. This is why we have to do it, because the reactions are on the table, by the way.
We got
this
some eye
movie
rolls.
is insane. This movie is wild. This movie is dreamy and magical and satirical, and it's really interesting movie that I do think is great, and I think it will be well worthy of revisiting and discussion.
Okay, well, my choice, and I will appropriately respond to Tony's choice later, but
yes.
My choice is Layer Cake. Daniel Craig, Tom Hardy, Sienna Miller. It's directed by Matthew Graham, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, it's a British film. It's a drug crime thriller suspense, very Heat-esque. It's just kind of highlights the recursive relationship often between drugs and violence, or criminality and rogue-like tendencies. So I don't know. It's Daniel Craig's really good. It's very sharp, very visceral, very mimetic, but at the same time blown out of proportion. So it's very good. I would like to see it again. See what you have to say.
Well, I have a movie in mind I think has a very slim chance of being picked. But what I want to nominate is our first foreign language film.
Okay.
The movie I'm thinking about is one of the top 10 highest grossing foreign language movies in the U.S. It is 2001's Twee, Jean-Pierre Jeunet's Amélie. It is a beautiful movie. I think really resonated with audience, and I think is open for discussion for that very reason. Why is this movie so appealing, even though it's French? It stars one of my favorite actresses, Audrey Tautou. It is really a beautiful, influential movie that I think can be seen in movies and TV shows in the past decade since it came out. It's just a wonderful movie about a young girl who's just trying to, or a young woman actually, just trying to figure out how to live life as happy as it can be and surround the people around her with happiness.
All right.
All right. So we've heard them.
We got a
now
butt.
we have to do the
Again,
rebuttals.
We do need that.
A second butt.
I have no idea. I'm totally at a loss. I need some arguments. Someone.
All right. So okay.
Specify. I want to specify if you've seen our movies.
No, I was about to.
Okay.
I was
well,
about to.
All right.
No,
fair
okay.
enough.
I will say I have seen neither of these movies, and they're both movies that are on my list to see. So if, no matter what's picked, I won't be too brokenhearted. However, I think that I have a movie that it's kind of in recent memory. It has kind of a fascinating reaction to it. It really divides people. There are people who hate
As
this
we
movie.
saw in the
There are
room.
people who
Yes.
hate this movie. There are people that love it, and there are people who are kind of over it and don't see what's great about it. I think it's really interesting. I think it's very discussable. I just love watching it. I just want to see this movie again, and I'm really interested to see how Connor responds to
Your
this movie as
enthusiasm is
well.
infectious, but Kirk.
All right. Well, in response to Tony, if I wanted to see James Franco have sex with Snoop Dogg, I would just take a few hits of LSD. Right? And I get enough.
Oh no! Don't spoil it.
I get enough homilies at church. All right. I don't need any more homilies or whatever you said. I don't even care. It's some foreign language BS. We don't need that. Anyways,
I think
no.
you just sunk his movie. I think you sunk it.
I think
we can have foreign, but let's keep it English, folks. Let's keep it. Daniel Craig. I mean, he's the biggest movie star in the world right now.
Is he
maybe.
really?
No, probably
No,
not.
he's not.
But he's James Bond. I mean, so this is James Bond. He puts down the martini. He picks up the ecstasy. It's great.
He's married to Rachel Weisz.
Yeah, he's married to Rachel Weisz. I mean, what could go wrong? But honestly,
Helping you out.
I do think it says a lot about the relationship between drugs and modernity and also all that pretentious bullshit I said earlier too. Yeah. So.
Well, I haven't seen Layer Cake. I've been interested in seeing it for some time. Spring Breakers, I've seen twice. First time in the theater, second time against my will. And well, you say it's discussable. There's nothing to discuss. It's garbage. It's shit. It is the type of movie that no one would want to hear us talk about. It is the type of movie that will pretty much turn our audience to zero. And
That's not. Why would you say that?
because it's awful. But anyway,
this
this gets to my other point. There's nothing to discuss. Everything's been said. Even if you haven't seen the movie, there's no need to. It's done.
That's not true
It's
at
had
all.
its moment. Oh my god.
See it
No one-
again.
you-
Even if we don't pick it, you should watch it.
You-
Make your own opinion. People love this movie. I love this
I just
movie.
want to finish the Spring Break counter argument by saying, who talks about this movie in 2015?
I talk about it. I
Besides
talk about it
Tony.
to beat strangers.
It had a 2-year,
in
3-year
public.
run. It's done.
We're still in the 2
Whoa. Let me defend my Amelie is a great movie. It had its audience. It's still talked about constantly. It is. You guys are just uncultured. You don't want to. You don't want to read as you watch
What
a movie.
movie lit the internet on fire? What movie prompted dozens of think pieces, controversy, CN, not Amelie, not Layer Cake, not James Bond.
Lamb Shake.
Shia LaBeouf's art thing got more people going.
But that's not a
than
movie.
Spring
If it
Breakers.
were, maybe we'd talk about
Wow.
it. It's not a
Okay,
movie.
guys, break it up. This has been this is some excellent disputation. I really like it. Here's the issue: Spring Breakers. We have to acknowledge that so far, who we know our audience to be is our parents. I'm worried about my mom watching Spring Breakers. So I gotta cross Spring Breakers off the list. I got it. I'm sorry. We can, and there's a lot of other Harmony Korine we can look at.
No, there's no Harmony Korine more watchable than
That my
Spring
parents
Breakers.
will watch. You're right. Okay, but I have to cross it off the list.
Oh.
I'm very sorry, Tony. And as for Amelie, I think we're gonna go with Amelie actually. And the reason is I'm fascinated by where this whole twee thing comes from. It's a fairly early movie that I know for a fact is kind of associated and worshipped by some people who I often have aesthetic differences with, let's say. So I'm interested to kind of go ad fontes to the source and see what it's kind of all about. And I'm sorry, Kirk, Layer Cake.
That's quite all right.
It's what I'm least familiar with.
I curse you forever. All right, so next episode.
So Amelie will be next. Thank you, guys. Okay. Yeah, and I guess that's really it. We'll see you next.
Bye.
We'll see you next week. And
Cool. Wait, can we say one more thing? Actually, one more thing about Little Big Man. It continues. We're 3 for 3 in movies that show a man's butt on this show.
Yeah,
it shows true. Dustin Hoffman's butt. Bye. So the holidays are right around the corner, and you know what that means, a trip to Grandma's house. And the trip to Grandma's house is always great. You got presents, you got food, you got milk and cookies, you got everything you could ever want. One thing Grandma does not have, though, for all the great stuff she does have, is technology. She's not going to have an HD TV and widescreen. She's not going to have a Blu-ray player. She doesn't even have a DVD player. The one thing she does have, though, is a VCR. So next time you go to Grandma's house and you're like, oh, I want to go to Grandma's house, I'm going to watch Looper, I'm going to watch Django Unchained. No, you're not. She doesn't have the tech for it. So this is where SDify comes in. What SDify does is it's a service where you're going to mail in all your Blu-rays. You're going to mail in Looper. You're going to mail in The Dark Knight Rises. And they're going to transform that into a standard def 4x3 formatted VHS tape that'll play in any standard VCR. Which means you can go to Grandma's house and watch all your favorite recent hits. Now, you have to order 10 at a time. They're not just going to send out an individual one. It's got to be worth their while. And for 10 VHS tapes, that's just $160. Now, if you enter the coupon code, the 706, you're going to get 5% off your first order. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but that's got to be at least a couple bucks. So the coupon code is the 706. That's THESEVEN 06. And no exclamation points this time, but you are going to do an emoji of a smiley face. That's a colon, and then close the parentheses. All right? So we're going to be back next week with a special holiday-themed episode. We're going to be talking about Amelie. Thank you guys so much for listening, and be sure to support our sponsors. We love you guys. Thanks. Hey guys, just one more quick note. I have been asked by our sponsor to include just this one word of caution here. Once you do send in those Blu-rays and they send you back the VHS tapes, you do not get the Blu-rays back. SDFI has to hold on to those. This is a one-and-done, one-way transaction. That being said, I think it's a great service, and I've used it many times. Thanks a lot.